Welcome back to Milan Recording Studios. My name is James Pavel Shawcross, and as you can see here, we have two very similar instruments. Both of these are very iconic, both of them are very famous, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you the visual differences and the physical differences between these two instruments, talking about why they're different, and then after that I will be playing them and showing you how they sound different as well. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what these two guys are, these are Rhodes. And there's a couple of different iterations of these. This one is a Fender Rhodes, and this one is a Rhodes. And you're probably wondering, what's the difference? They look basically the same. They're set up a little bit differently, but all the keys and stuff are the same, and the tops look the same. Well, there are some slight differences, and I'll go into that in a little bit here. But like I said, today's video is going to be comparing a 1975 stage model Rhodes versus a 1973 Suitcase model Fender Rhodes. So let's get into it. Let me just show you some of the small details that make these guys different, and I'll also tell you a little bit more about them as I do that. And so let's just show you like the logos and the knobs and the things that make them different, and then like I said, afterwards I'll get around to playing them and show you how they sound different, because they actually do have different sounds. They're pretty much identical internally, but they actually do have very different sounds. So let's check this out. First, let's take a look here at the Fender Rhodes model. This instrument was made in 1973, which interestingly is the exact amount of keys it has. It has 73 keys and was made in the year 1973. That's kind of a cool detail. And it was made on the 49th week of 1973, which is also a cool detail. Now, Fender Rhodes from 1971 to 1973, that's the most desirable range of instruments you can have. The Suitcase model from that time period is the most desirable Fender Rhodes that there is. Generally, some people might disagree, but for the most part, everyone says that Rhodes from that time period are the most desirable, and this one definitely is well within that time bracket. So you can see here that this is what an instrument like that looks like. Now, it's called the Suitcase model as compared to the stage model because it has a suitcase underneath of it, which is the amp. So you've got a little speaker cabinet under there. It's not little, it's very loud, and it's got lots of volume to it, and it has a fantastic sound as well. And so you have a speaker cabinet that the instrument sits on. These legs actually fold away for transport. They just hinge back towards the speaker cabinet, and that's how they work. And so basically you can set this on top of it, hook it up, and it has a really great sound. Another nice feature about it is you have vibrato. I'll show you a close-up of the knob for that later, and of course give you a demo of the sound later as well. But you have vibrato on here, and it actually pans back and forth between, I believe, both halves of the speaker cabinet, and has a really wonderful sound as well. So that is a very desirable feature of these instruments as well, the vibrato. So that's just a little overview of the 1973 Fender Rhodes. Like I said, I'll give you a close-up of the logo and the knobs in just a little bit here, but now let's take a look at the 1975 Rhodes stage model. So now let's take a look at the Rhodes. Now this instrument here is from 1975, so a couple years later after the Fender Rhodes, and this one was actually made in only the 6th week of 1975, so it has to be one of the earliest Rhodes instruments that they made. Now again, I'm saying Rhodes and not Fender Rhodes. There's a difference here, and in this particular example there's not actually a huge difference, but later on the Rhodes instruments began getting cheaper and the quality of the parts began decreasing, as well as I also believe the quality control began decreasing as well. The hammers and the whippings and whatever, the mechanical parts inside, all those started becoming made of plastic. The keys were made of plastic as well. Here they're wooden, but later on the whole key became made of plastic as well, so things just started going downhill a while after 1975. But like I said, this one was only made in the 6th week of 1975, which I believe is very shortly after the Rhodes name was changed. And if any of you guys know when that name change happened and when the Rhodes instruments started being made, I would really love to know, because that would kind of help see just how early of a Rhodes instrument this one is. Now, the reason the Rhodes name was changed from Fender Rhodes to Rhodes is for marketing tactics. Basically, Fender wanted the instruments to be able to be sold by people who were not Fender dealers. So that would mean basically anyone who, I guess, sold pianos could also sell the Rhodes instrument. It was very popular at the time, and before this, only Fender dealers who also sold guitars and stuff were able to sell the Fender Rhodes, which would mean that generally guitarists aren't, too interested in keyboard instruments, and also vice versa. So marketing an instrument like this towards a greater audience of dealers, and therefore a greater audience of people, was a good idea for Fender at the time and Rhodes at the time, because it helped sell more instruments. So that is the explanation there of the name change. And as you can see here, this instrument looks a little bit different from the other instrument. I'll get a closer up detail of the logos as well as the knobs over there on the end, so you can see what is exactly different, but you can also see that there's no speaker cabinet here. And that's because this is the stage model. This also has 73 keys. You can see here it's got the cool 73 logo, but this is the stage model. So basically what this means here is, as you can see, there is no speaker cabinet underneath. You just have these neat looking legs. There's also a pedal that I don't have installed there that goes in the middle, but there's legs in the pedal instead of a speaker cabinet underneath. So basically the reason for this is, well, by the name, it's for the stage. It's a little bit easier to transport. It's still very heavy, but there's no speaker cabinet now, which actually doesn't weigh that much at all. But now there's no speaker cabinet, so it's a bit easier to move and transport around. The legs are a bit annoying to get on and to turn over to set the instrument down, but it is a little bit less cumbersome to move than the Suitcase because there's only one piece instead of two pieces. Before you have the Suitcase part and the keyboard part, but now you just have the keyboard part, so it's a bit easier to move around. So now let's go back to the Suitcase model, and I'll show you the Fender Rhodes logo, I'll show you the knobs on it, and then I'll also come back to this one, show you the Rhodes logo, show you the knobs on it, show you why they're a little bit different, and then we will get to hearing what these instruments sound like. So this here is the Fender Rhodes logo. As you can see, obviously it has the cool kind of diagonal Fender logo, and then right next to it is written Rhodes, and underneath that it says makers of fine keyboard instruments. As I mentioned earlier on in the video, the Fender name is there because, of course, this is a Fender product, but at the time that meant that only Fender dealers could sell the Rhodes. Someone who was perhaps a piano dealer or perhaps sold other brands of electric keyboards wouldn't be able to sell the Fender Rhodes unless they were also a Fender, say, guitar dealer or Fender amp dealer, basically a Fender dealer. So that's why later on the Fender name was removed and it simply said Rhodes, so that it could open up the the boundaries to people who weren't Fender dealers and increase the market of people who could purchase as well as sell the instrument. So that's the Fender Rhodes logo. I personally prefer it. I think it looks really nice, but that's what it looks like. And that is, of course, on the 1973 Fender Rhodes Suitcase model. So this is the logo on the 1975 stage model Rhodes. And as you can see, the Fender logo is gone. Now it just simply says Rhodes, and then underneath, like it did before, makers of fine keyboard instruments. I personally don't like this logo as much. It doesn't look quite as cool and classy as the Fender Rhodes logo does, but nonetheless, this is the Rhodes logo, and that is the way you can tell the difference between when Fender had the name on it and then when it simply became the Rhodes. So that's what it looks like. So these here are the three knobs that you will find on the Fender Rhodes, and what's kind of neat is they're actually not just three, but there's actually a total of 5 here because the two on the right are actually 2 knobs in one. But let's start off here on the left. The left one is simply volume. The one in the middle, though, is kind of like a little bit of an EQ. The ring on the outside controls the bass, and the ring on the inside with the little silver end on it controls the treble. And turning it to the left cuts it, and turning it to the right boosts it. That's why it says cut boost underneath of it. The knob to the right of it also has dual functions. It's the vibrato knob. You pull it, first of all, to turn on the vibrato, and then not only that, but the outside ring controls the intensity, and the inside ring controls the speed of the vibrato. Also on this same exact panel, if we pan over here to the left, you can see the input as well as the accessory little ports there. What's kind of funny is the input jack isn't your standard 1/4-inch jack. It's what appears to be something probably sort of proprietary with like 4 off-center little prongs on the inside, and I've never seen anything quite like it before, but that is what the input jack on the Fender Rhodes is. And then you also have 2 accessory ports there, as you can see. So this here is the control panel, if you will, on the Rhodes instrument, the stage model. This one's, like I said, is from 1975. And a few things you can notice. First of all, on the left it says Rhodes Mark I, and then you have an input jack, which is sort of an output jack, but it's also the input jack, and I'll show you that in a little bit there. And then also you can see the bass boost and the volume, both of which are pretty self-explanatory. As you can see, we don't have control over the treble on this instrument, we only have control of the bass frequencies, and then the volume, of course, is your volume switch. One thing interesting to note here is that on each knob, you can really see it on the bass boost, but if I move my light a little bit, you can also see it on the volume knob right about there. There is a little F, and that is the F from the Fender logo we were just looking at a moment ago, so I'm sure you recognize it, you've probably seen it before. But that's the little F for the Fender logo. And that's the only place that this instrument says Fender or has any relation to Fender. On the inside panel on the harp, it does not say Fender, it simply says Rhodes. On the instrument on the outside, like I just showed you on all sides, even the back, it only says Rhodes. But on those knobs, it has the little Fender F, so either these are replacement knobs from a later time, which I doubt because they don't appear to be newer, and I don't know why they would get changed, but that's one possibility. Or the other possibility is they just had them laying around and slapped them onto the Rhodes. This is, as I said, a very early model. It even says Mark I, which is the first iteration of the Rhodes, and it was made in the 6th week of 1975, so it's probably a very early Rhodes. Perhaps later ones had different knobs, or perhaps they just kept the little Fender on there, just reminded everyone that technically this was a Fender product. So this is underneath of the cover of the Fender Rhodes, and as you can see there is a badge on the bottom right of the instrument that says Fender Rhodes. Now, it also has the serial number and the model number, but it just kind of talks about patent dates and things like that. And if we pan up here to the top right of the instrument, you'll see that it says 49 and 73. And while those may look kind of like random numbers, basically what's going on here is the first set of numbers, the 49, is the week in which this was built, and then the 73 is the year in which it was built. So that would be the 49th week of 1973. And this whole frame that you're seeing here is called the harp. There's like a metal frame and then also some wood there that many things mount to, and that whole assembly is the harp. It lifts up for access and maintenance, and I'll show you guys how that works in just a little bit here. But as you can see here, this is the inside of the Fender Rhodes, and basically it's entirely mechanical. There's all kinds of mechanical moving parts, and it's kind of like a simplified piano. When you push down a key, you might not be able to see it, but I'll show you in a little bit later how it works. When you push down a key, there's a little hammer that moves up, hits the tine, which is underneath. This is the tone bar, which vibrates in sympathy with the tine, and then underneath is the actual tine the hammer strikes. You push a key, it strikes the tine, a damper lifts off, sustaining the tine, and then when you let it go, the damper comes up and mutes the tine again. So this whole system right here is called the tone bar assembly. The one on top is the tone bar, the one on the bottom is the tine, and they're connected together so that this one can vibrate in sympathy. Basically, it helps to add sustain, and I also think that it's a second harmonic for the tine, which is kind of cool. But this is the inside of the Fender Rhodes, and that is what it looks like. One additional thing I wanted to mention real quick here about the instrument is that over here on the top of the highest tone bars, you'll see these funny brackets. Those, I am told, are for adding sustain. If a note doesn't have enough sustain, you put one of those little brackets on it and move it back and forth until you get enough sustain for your liking. So this is the inside of the Fender Rhodes, and as you can see, it basically looks brand new. Basically, the story behind this instrument was that it spent most of its life in a closet, and that is why the inside of this instrument looks brand new the way it does. But you can get an idea of what it looks like. The inside, the keys are basically almost just like those of a piano. They've got little felt bushings in there, and the length, I believe, is similar to those of a piano's key. And now you can get a really good look at the mechanism here. It's basically a simplified piano action. You have a hammer that comes up and would strike the tine, and the tine would go right about here and would come up and strike the tine, bounce back a little bit, and then the damper would come off, and when you let go of the key, the damper would come up and rest against the tine. The dampers are on like a little metal rod, and if they need adjustment, you can just go in there and gently bend that aluminum little plate, the little rod, and to move the damper farther away and closer to the tine and align it properly. Another thing I wanted to point out on the inside here is this little box here, which for some reason is stamped with a B. Well, not stamped, they're just written on with like a pen, and then over here it also says T2. I assume this is some kind of a preamp, and if it's not a preamp, it definitely is some sort of electronics that are controlling all of the plugs up here, the knobs, as well as the input knob up here. So this probably contains the vibrato controls and sends the signal down to the amp, and then also is most likely a preamp. You can also see here the tines, which you were not able to see before. These are what they look like. The little spring on them is for tuning, and then the copper wires are, of course, the electromagnetic pickups. So that is the underside of the tone bar generator, and that is what the inside and the underside of the Fender Rhodes looks like. Before I leave the Fender Rhodes, I want to show you what the Miracle mod looks like. It's pretty subtle, but I just wanted to show you what it looks like. It's found underneath of the hammers, and let me show you what that looks like. So let me show you here what the Miracle mod looks like. If I lift up two of these hammers here, you will see this is the end of the key. If I move it, it will go up and down. And as you can see, there's a little bump there, and that little bump is the Miracle mod. That little tiny thing is everything that's making this action on the Fender Rhodes play light, play smooth, play quick, and just overall be wonderful. And you can see here on the other key, it's a black key, so I gotta reach around, kind of funny to get to it. And this here is the other key. So those two are the keys, all the keys have it on them, and that little tiny bump on it is the Miracle mod, and that is what's making the action on this instrument feel fantastic. So now we're looking at the inside of the Rhodes, and as you can see there, for starters, that little badge there is different. Now it says Rhodes instead of Fender Rhodes, as the other one did. If we take a look at the top right of the harp, you will see that now it says 06 and 75, 75 being the year, and 06 being the 6th week of 1975. So those are really only the two main differences on the inside. There's one other thing that I'll show you in a little bit later, but as you can see, the main construction of the inside is basically all the same. You've got tone bars, you've got tines, it all works exactly the same as before, and that is the interior of the Rhodes. Basically, at this point in time, structurally identical to that of the Fender Rhodes that came out just a few years before. So this is what the inside of the Rhodes looks like from 1975, the stage model, and as you can see, it looks slightly different. One thing I think I'm noticing is that the plastic here on, I guess it's the hammer shank, is a bit more yellow than it was on the Fender Rhodes. Now perhaps that's because the Fender Rhodes spent its whole life in a closet, and while this instrument is still in pretty good condition, it did spend some time out on the road, or at least being played in someone's house. Perhaps that's why these hammer shanks are more yellow. Or it could be because perhaps they're made of a cheaper material that just didn't age quite as well as on the Fender Rhodes. I'm not exactly sure, but I do think that these look a bit more yellow. But aside from that visual difference and the fact that there's no preamp over here, everything here is much simpler and it's passive. Aside from those two differences, everything inside of this instrument is basically the same as the Fender Rhodes. We still have wooden keys, we still have wooden hammers. That's a very interesting or important detail to note, that the hammers themselves are made of wood there. As you can see, if I pick up another one, it might look a little different. Yeah, that one kind of does, yeah. So the end of these, the hammers themselves, is this big wooden chunk here, are made of wood. Later on, the hammer shank and the hammer all became one piece that were all plastic, and these aren't as desirable. I haven't played one of those. I'd kind of be interested to play it and see what it feels like, but I've heard that they don't feel as good as the wooden hammered instrument. So that's one thing that's important to note, is that even though this was a Rhodes branded instrument, they still hadn't changed much, if anything, on the inside, and that's why we still have wooden hammers. Everything else here is basically the same. We've still got the same setup with the tines and the tone bars and the dampers, and basically everything else here on the instrument is the same. But one thing that isn't would be the fact that this instrument is completely stock and there is no Miracle Mod installed. So let's show you what it looks like underneath the end of these keys here and show you what it looks like when there is no Miracle Mod installed. So now let's take a look under the action of the Rhodes and see what it looks like when there is no Miracle Mod installed. So that is the back of the key there. You can see that red piece of felt just like before. If I move it up and down, that's the end of the key. And as you can see there, it's kind of flat. There's no bump like there was before. And this is how the action would have come stock on my Suitcase Rhodes. The Miracle Mod was installed very recently, but the Miracle Mod was installed there. But as you can see here, it is not installed, and this is how both of these keyboards would have come stock, and this is how this one is because it is still stock. There's just a flat piece of felt there on the back of that wood that rubs underneath the yellow part there that you can see. Just above that is kind of like the base of, I guess, the hammer shank or the whipping or whatever you want to call that plastic piece there. It's all kind of the same on these instruments. It's all one big piece. So basically this whole felt will rub against the underside there of the hammer when it goes up and down, which creates a lot of tension and a lot of friction. And that is why, without the Miracle Mod, these instruments have a very heavy and substantial feeling action. That's why, because of that flat piece there. So what you're seeing here is the side of the Fender Rhodes, and the plug I'm pulling out right there is a weird proprietary thing. It's got like 4 prongs in it, and it's very strange. You can also see some of the other stuff here. There's the power switch there, very similar to the ones they used on the guitar amps. You can also see that there's 2 ports for an external amplifier, a headphone jack, which is kind of interesting, and then also the power plug. Directly below the power plug is some text about CBS musical instruments, and I'll show you a close-up of that in just a bit. You can also see that on the side of the instrument is a fuse. So here's the close-up of the CBS musical instruments, and what's interesting is that during this time, while CBS Music, many people believe they kind of messed up the guitar division of Fender, what's interesting is that the Rhodes division of CBS was actually, during CBS's ownership of Fender Rhodes, they were producing the best Rhodes that they ever made, which is just a kind of an interesting thing about that CBS ownership, and something I wanted to mention, that the best Rhodes instruments were actually being made while CBS owned Fender. So let's try out the 1973 Rhodes and see how it sounds compared to the 1975 Rhodes behind me, and we'll just kind of get an idea of what the sound differences is, and I'll kind of tell you a little bit about them, and I'll play 4 or 5 songs here to demonstrate the sounds of these instruments to give you an idea of what makes them different and what makes them the Rhodes. So let's start off here with the 1973 Fender Rhodes, and what I'm going to do first is play a little excerpt of Riders on the Storm by The Doors. It's a very famous Rhodes piece, and we're going to see how it sounds first on the 1973 Fender Rhodes, and then try it out on the stage Rhodes. As you can certainly hear there, I was using the vibrato, but the stage Rhodes that I'm about to play does not have the vibrato, but I will be using the vibrato from time to time while playing the 73 Rhodes, because that's part of what makes this instrument very desirable, not only from this year because of this particular qualities, the qualities this instrument has, the build quality and all that, but the fact that this has vibrato is a very desirable feature of these instruments, and that's why most everyone prefers at least the sound of a Suitcase Rhodes to that of a stage, because the stage models didn't have vibrato, the Suitcase models did, and it's a really, really awesome sound, as you could hear there. It was there. I believe they also used the vibrato in the original record. Perhaps might not have been that exact setting, but it'll give you an idea of what the Rhodes sounds like. So now let's hear how that piece sounds on the 1975 Rhodes. So that is the sound of this particular Rhodes from 1975. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, and I think I said this already before in the video, in fact I showed you the fact that this does not have the Miracle mod. As I just said, this instrument doesn't have the Miracle mod. The action in here is completely original, and it hasn't been refined to the level of the 1973 Suitcase model. So it feels a little bit different from the other one. The action is a lot heavier. The action on this one over here is very, very light, and this one over here has a bit more of a substantial feel. And the sound in this one is also different, as you can hear. It has a more mellow sound, a more almost kind of like a muffled sound. The one over here is a bit brighter, and I'm thinking most of that is coming from the Peterson preamp. I'll talk about that a little bit more in later. But the sound on this one is a little bit different. Let me know what you guys think of the sound differences. But let's head back to the other one and play another song. So now we're back to the 1973 Fender Rhodes, and now let's hear what another piece sounds like. And I think I'm going to play my test piece that I often play on acoustic pianos, and I play it a lot on other instruments as well. I think I'm going to try it first without the vibrato and then with, just to kind of see how it sounds, and we'll just see how that sounds on the Fender Rhodes. I think the vibrato added a bit to that song. I personally think that that piece works a bit better on the actual piano than it does on the Rhodes, but that's just me. Maybe some of you out there really like how that sounds on here. And as you can hear, the Fender Rhodes does have a bit of a different sound than the Rhodes, the stage Rhodes from 1975. It's got a bit of a different sound, and a lot of that is coming from the fact that this has a Peterson amp, which I think is giving the instrument a bit of a brighter quality. If you listen to it, you can hear that this has a bit more... It has a bit of a more overtone-rich sound. You can hear more of the higher harmonics and it's just a bit brighter sounding. If you listen to the Rhodes, you'll hear that it's a bit more dialed back and it's a little bit more based around the fundamental, and there aren't as many of those bright, happy overtones in there. And part of that is, I think, because of the Peterson amp, it just works the sound a bit different, and also because this has the... I guess it's an EQ. You can modify the bass as well as the treble of the instrument, and the Rhodes only has a bass boost. This has a bass boost as well, but you also have a treble boost. Mine's right about in the middle, because if you turn it all the way up to the right, it hurts my ears. So I have it right about in the middle, and I think that's about generally where I usually leave it. But this also has that treble boost. If you cut that back and you turn the bass up a bit more, it sounds a bit more like the Rhodes. But let's see how that test piece sounds on the Rhodes, shall we? So now let's try the test piece out on the 1975 Rhodes. Again, this one doesn't have vibrato, so I'm not going to be able to do that. On the other one I played it twice, but here I can only play it once. So let's hear what it sounds like without vibrato on this instrument. There's a lot less treble tones in this instrument, and I think that if you had a treble knob on here that you can turn up the intensity of the treble frequencies, I think it would sound a bit brighter and it might have a little bit more presence. But that is the sound of the Rhodes. You do have a bass boost down here, if I demonstrate that for you. There's a little bit, it's kind of subtle, but it's there. So that's the sound of the bass boost there. I had it right around 7, but that's the sound of the bass boost, but you don't have a treble boost, and that's another thing that makes the stage Rhodes different from the Suitcase Rhodes. Let's try another song, head back to the Suitcase Rhodes, and try another piece. So now I'm back at the Fender Rhodes, and let's play another piece on it. Let's play a Bach hymn. This one is called We Pray Now to the Holy Spirit, and I'm going to play it without vibrato because I think this one sounds just a little bit funky with vibrato. It works, but I think I like it without vibrato. So that's how that piece sounds on the Fender Rhodes, but what does it sound like on the Rhodes? Let's go find out. So now let's see what We Pray Now to the Holy Spirit sounds like on the stage Rhodes. Let's head back over to the Suitcase and try out a final piece. The final piece I'm going to play on these two Rhodes instruments is going to be this one. This is another Bach hymn. This one is called Adorn Thyself, My Soul with Gladness, and let's see how this one sounds on the Fender Rhodes. This time I'm going to be using the vibrato because I think this one sounds pretty cool with it. I think that piece works really well with the vibrato and it sounds fantastic on the Fender Rhodes, but now let's go see how it sounds on the stage Rhodes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this comparison between two iconic musical instruments, the Fender Rhodes Suitcase model as well as the Rhodes Stage model. Now one thing I wanted to mention here is that both of these could have been ordered in their counterpart, if you will. Back in the day you could have got a Fender Rhodes Stage model, and back in the day you could have got a Rhodes Suitcase model, and of course there's still those out in the used market. So there's a lot of comparisons that are being made here, not only the instruments themselves, but there are some subtle differences. This one has the built-in speaker cabinet, and also it has the Peterson preamp. This one has no Peterson preamp, and it is being run through an external speaker, which is a Roland KC350 keyboard amp. So those are the main differences that would be producing different sounds, and the Peterson preamp, I think, is the biggest sound difference here. I think if this had all the same internals and everything was identical, but there was no Peterson preamp, I think it would sound a lot more like the Rhodes over here, because you don't have a treble boost over here, you only have a bass boost, and I think the sounds would have been a lot similar. But the Peterson preamp, I think, is adding a lot, and of course the vibrato is absolutely fantastic, and everyone loves the sound of the Fender Rhodes vibrato. That's why the Suitcase models are so desirable, because the vibrato is an awesome feature. So again, hopefully you guys enjoyed this comparison. If you liked it, make sure to go ahead and give the video a like. Let me know what you thought down in the comments section below of the sound differences between these two instruments and just all that stuff. I like reading your comments and they're awesome. So make sure to go ahead and do that. And if you want, you can think about subscribing to my channel. I've got lots of cool videos out there of keyboards, organs, Rhodes, and all kinds of cool things in between, from pianos to more oddball things like harpsichords and all kinds of neat stuff like that. So if you want, you can go check all that out. If you want to subscribe, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. But before I go, I do want to mention that since I now have a Fender Rhodes Suitcase, the one I've always wanted, I'm thinking about selling this one, so let me know down in the comment section below if you're interested in having a Rhodes stage model piano. Bye-bye!